And in New York City this hour, as you just heard, President Donald Trump is on the world stage at the United Nations General Assembly, and he is meeting face-to-face with top leaders as nearly 140 heads of state look to hash out some of the biggest conflicts around the world. As we told you, Trump just wrapped up an in-person address on stage. It's his first at the Assembly since 2019. Now, one of the focuses of his speech, the war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, and a two-state solution. Listen to the president's message to these countries who made the move this week to formally recognize a Palestinian state.
I have also been deeply engaged in seeking a ceasefire in Gaza. Have to get that done. Have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now. Thank you.
And now let's bring in CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Kealy. Courtney, thank you for joining us. What stood out to you when it comes to what the president had to say today?
Well, just those words the president said. That was the one moment when he received applause from the UN General Assembly. Release the hostages now, saying that on the Jewish New Year of Rosh Hashanah. Now, he did lay the blame at Hamas. He did lay the blame at Hamas on October 7th, and he called for an immediate ceasefire, but he didn't offer any details whether there could be any revision or revival of what the negotiations have been since Prime Minister Netanyahu stopped them in March. He went from Hamas and Gaza to Ukraine and Russia, saying he was surprised because President Putin could have solved that in 3.5 days, and it's now 3.5 years. He said a really interesting quote: "You know, in war, you never know what will happen," because he has made this the peace presidency, the negotiations presidency. He mentioned Iran and stopping the threat of nuclear war by the so-called 12-day war and the U.S. hitting the nuclear facilities there. But as he's mentioned all these countries and he's mentioned all this international strife, he also mentioned without comment that you never know with war, and that is true. And he has been having a very hard time negotiating any kind of peace deals in these two major conflicts. And he's also kind of acknowledged that. I mean, the speech was bookended by a lot of domestic agendas, and the end, his rejection of climate change, and also the theme pulling through was American illegal immigration, not really a global scale, but a domestic American issue. But this heart of the matter was right in the middle, mentioning the Middle East, mentioning the Russia-Ukraine war, and mentioning the other wars that he said he has fixed, which are not necessarily true. And he did say, though, he doesn't want the peace prize. He has said that before, that he wants it. He just wants peace.
All right. Courtney Kealy, thank you so much for your analysis. Appreciate it. Now, Trump also hinted at possible new tariffs on Russia if no deal is made to end the war in Ukraine. Listen.
In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. I mean, you're much closer to this. We have an ocean in between. You're right there. And Europe has to step it up. They can't be doing what they're doing. They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia. It's embarrassing to them.
On that note, let's bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. Elizabeth, thank you for your time today. What is your takeaway when it comes to the president's remarks on the war in Ukraine?
Well, as some of the previous correspondents have pointed out, that speech was very short on detail. And certainly when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, there are already powerful tariffs against Russia. President Trump made it sound as if they could be ramped up and that the Europeans could ramp them up. But the devil will be in the details. And certainly President Zelensky, who was no doubt glued to the TV for that speech, will have wanted to hear more detail about what President Trump can do to put pressure on Russia. I expect that the Ukrainians will be very disappointed and the Russians will be not very worried.
And we heard President Trump asking Europe to step it up there and wondering why they're still buying oil from Russia. Where does he see European nations lacking when it comes to that war in Ukraine?
Well, Europe was very tied into Russia for energy when this war began. And it has been very successful in diminishing the amount of oil that it buys from Russia. And also gas, but it is true that in particularly Hungary and Slovakia still buy a lot of gas from Russia, $20 billion worth. And I think, in fact, that last year, the amount of money that went for that gas to Russia in payment was more than the amount of money the EU gave to Ukraine. So President Trump is quite right in pointing out that it's absurd. It's not so easy to get energy to those countries that doesn't come from Russia. They are physically close to Russia, and the energy infrastructure is built so that that's the easiest way to get it. But it may be something that President Trump will be able to negotiate with the Europeans, who clearly, for common sense reasons, understand that's something that they really must do.
Yeah. Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much for your time. And now we're going to go live to New York City, outside the United Nations, with CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, thank you for making time for us. The president spent a lot of time talking about immigration today as well. What stood out to you about that?
What stood out to me, Mugo, is that he wasn't so much talking about U.S. immigration as he was talking about world migration. And he said point blank to U.S. allies, your countries are going to hell. And he went on to say that if they don't work harder to keep migrants out, that essentially they will lose their heritage and that their economies will fail as well. Let me read this to you. He said, Europe is in serious trouble. Illegal aliens are pouring into Europe. Nobody's doing anything to keep them out. He said, I look at London and it's been so changed. They want to go to Sharia law. Not sure what he was referring to there, but he did go on to say immigration and suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Europe. What makes the world beautiful is that each country is unique. So basically, he was urging countries around the world, particularly wealthy countries, to either follow his lead when it comes to immigration policy or, in his view, suffer the consequences.
Yeah. The president also touched on that midnight operation a few months ago on Iran's nuclear facilities. What did he have to say about that?
He said that he had sent the supreme leader in Iran a letter essentially making an offer of full cooperation with Iran in exchange for Iran giving up its nuclear program. But he says that that was rejected and that that's why he ended up dropping those bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Today, many of Iran's former military commanders, in fact, I can say almost all of them, are no longer with us. They're dead. And 3 months ago, in Operation Midnight Hammer, 7 American B-2 bombers dropped the 14 30,000-pound each bombs on Iran's key nuclear facilities, totally obliterating everything. No other country on earth could have done what we did. No other country has the equipment to do what we did. We have the greatest weapons on earth. We hate to use them. But we did something that for 22 years people wanted to do.
President Trump also talked quite a bit about the other conflicts around the world that he argued that he had a hand in bringing to an end, making the case that that American strength is back, and an implicit threat that he'll go after other countries. In fact, he said point blank that if Russia does not come to the table, that the U.S. is ready to impose harsh new consequences for that country as well.
And he has mentioned sanctions before, and yet nothing has happened. So we'll see what comes after that speech from today. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for joining us here on 24/7.